Hey guys, welcome to another video. So, I found this guy named Lavader, I don't know. I'm just going to watch this video. It's all about refuting micro-conceptions about monarchism. So this is about the monarchy. There is, well, I would say two different versions of monarchy, right? One's like the old version, right? The really old ones, right? Back in like what, the medieval era, right? That was the medieval era. They did kind of do that in the back then, but at the same time, it wasn't just sitting on the throne. They were leading, they were finding strategies, they had to constantly get everything together. They had to constantly organize their troops, make sure everything's going well, right? Monarchy, like when you had a king and when he was under pressure, he would either collapse and, be a bad leader, or he's going to lead his people and do something great. It matters all about the person, right? Let's first get into the video. I'll talk more about my stance on it as soon as we get in a little more.
This video is brought to you by my kind Patreon supporters and channel members. If you enjoy my content and seek to take your support a step further, you can freely join my Patreon or become a
I might join it if I had money because like this guy's pretty cool. I don't know.
channel member with several added benefits. With that out of the way, enjoy today's content. Monarchism is perhaps one of the most misunderstood political systems in the world. Most people have moved away from the idea of monarchism because they deem it to be an old system from the Middle Ages that is in no way superior to modern republics. Majority of us are probably already familiar with the stereotypical presentation of a king or emperor, a man sitting on a golden throne in his castle.
Bro, they do not act like that. They have to worry about everything, right? They gotta worry about plagues, they gotta worry about people revolting, they gotta worry about, keeping everything good. It isn't just about, oh, we have money, right? Because, like, 99% of the population was, not really that rich. So, yeah, he had to worry about, the stinky peasants rising up and wiping him out. He can't just overtax them like an insane amount. And if you don't believe me, have you ever heard of the French Revolution? When the monarchy does that stuff, he almost immediately dies.
Hoarding all the money for himself, living a life full of luxury, all the while his subjects lack basic needs like food and healthcare. This sort of stereotype has been portrayed in many cartoons, movies, and comic books. And thanks
I would say the reason why it's like that is because the culture in America, we're very anti-monarchy, right? We're very highly against someone who's really powerful. We're all for limits. We're all for trying to have more self-individualism, I guess. Even though monarchy can show a lot of individualism for the people too. But that's the ideas of America, and since America has dominated the entire world, that's the ideas we stick with now. So, if America never really rose up, I think we would still have monarchs everywhere. I think the only monarch I know is still around that, like, other than the UK and Denmark, because I think Denmark has a monarch still. Georgia. I think Georgia, the monarch is so popular that even the president doesn't want to be in position of power. I think the president wanted the monarch to be the leader. Georgians want to go back to traditionalism. Good for them.
to these stereotypes, many people have the impression that a king is something backwards from days gone by, and insist that people who still believe in the ideology of monarchism are anti-progressive, stuck in the medieval period. And as I said, monarchism today is not exactly popular, except if you speak of countries which already are monarchies in the modern day. But I am specifically referring to strict republican nations in which just the idea of a monarchy is something to laugh at, and that's why in these nations you won't really find much support for monarchism.
What's weird is that they're more progressive than America. Look at the UK. The UK has free healthcare and all that, right? High taxes. A lot of people are much more left leaning in the UK, right? And it has a monarchy. You see what I mean there? And Denmark and UK and Canada are some of the most socialist countries around that are not socialist. They're the closest ones to being socialist in the Western world. Just saying, like, that's insane to think about. Monarchs are more progressive than us. Monarchs are more progressive. That's pretty funny.
And as a monarchist who lives in a strictly Republican nation, I can confirm this.
Also, I think Canada is much worse. They always talk about how free everything is and all that. It's a great place. Well, the president has a lot of powers that you didn't realize. He can hold down an election for quite a while, and he can also be able to have control over certain amounts of people voted in. They gave the president, or I think prime minister, a lot more powers than the president has here. That's why Canada's so much more corrupt. And the weird thing is, the progressives love the monarch. Bro, the guy who's, he's still in office, he loves the monarchy.
The few people in real life I have revealed my monarchist views to always ask the same questions. Why do we need a king in this day and age? Don't you believe that people need to have a say in who runs their nation? Won't a king trample our freedoms? Isn't monarchy just a dictator, a tyrant, and so on? And seeing how monarchism is not exactly popular in the world, you don't see monarchists that commonly on your average social media page, especially YouTube. But here I am today to finally join in as a defender of monarchist and traditional values, alongside many other of my friends who helped me write the script for this video. Without further ado, let's address our very first myth about monarchism. We will start off with perhaps the most famous claim about monarchism, and that monarchism is just too expensive. Why should we pay money to one man who can then choose to spend it on whatever he wants? Now, not only is the claim that all tax money goes to the monarch completely false, but also that it doesn't really work that way, and it's not as black and white as it may seem. Let's take
A lot of people assume it's always black and white, right? That's like a lot of people see it as. A lot of people see this world, especially like if you look at the baby boomers, a lot of them saw the world black and white, you know? It makes sense, right, that monarchy would be unpopular in our world because we're always seeing stuff as, oh, this is good, oh, this is bad, this is good, this is bad, right? And I think that's just a horrible way of looking at the world. There are some things that are, purely good, purely bad. Take Satan and God, for example. But there's so much more that's just black and white. If you studied history for like 10 minutes, you would know what I mean.
Take the United Kingdom as an example. Currently, the government pays around £100 million each year to maintain the royal family, which means that an average British citizen pays the royal family around £4.5 each year through taxes, which is certainly not a lot. But one thing almost never mentioned is the fact that the royal family personally holds a good chunk of land known as the royal estate, and it is through these estates that the royal family earns about £312 million each year, or to be exact, it's what they should be earning. Every single British monarch since the times of George III has voluntarily turned over all the profits from the estate towards the government, and in return, the government would give them an annual salary.
That's pretty interesting, honestly. I've seen this video before, so I get what he's saying, right? As long as you put some limits to a monarch, I think monarchy is not a bad idea. I think it's a good thing, as long as you get a good, strong monarch. Also, everything is corrupt. This world, right? This world's always gonna have, corrupt people. So, just saying, I don't think monarchy is that bad when you have just that one person who's able to make some good decisions and was able to keep a lot of the bad people on check. You just have to have a leader, no matter what system, as long as the leader is good, right? There are some stuff that just leads to way more corruption, however.
Meaning that the United Kingdom earns around £200 million every year thanks to the royal family. The royals are perfectly able to sustain themselves without taxpayer money, and would be earning 3 times more than what they already earn. And if the royals decided to take back all their deserved revenue from the estates, the government would actually be losing money, which in return means that taxes would be increased on ordinary citizens and not decreased as many would believe. But I hear you saying, why don't we just confiscate all that land and take all the profits for ourselves?
Because that's kind of selfish, don't you think? The monarch has a lot to do. Like, he's not just sitting there, he's doing things, right? He's managing a whole nation of millions and millions of people, right? But back then, you could get away with a lot of this stuff because there wasn't a highly populated country, right? You had like that one guy and then you had 10,000 peasants, right? Right? But then it changed. It came from like 10,000 to having more like 10 million, right? Then you gotta manage all those citizens. It became so hard. Now you have to worry about that kind of stuff, right? So I'm just saying, it, I'm just saying, like, monarchs, they do a lot. They actually have stuff to do.
Well, in this case, if the crown estates were privatized, the government would only be earning a specified amount from the corporate tax, and all other revenue would go to the company itself. So the United Kingdom would still be losing more money and only getting a small amount of the revenue. Point being, it is thanks to the royal family that the average British citizen is paying less in taxes than they would if the monarchy was abolished. Thanks to the fact that the royal family generously hands over all their privately earned profit to the government in exchange for a fixed salary. Not only that, but historically, monarchs have taxed the people just enough so they could rule without problems, and the people weren't so much taxed to have the need to revolt. Modern monarchs usually have side businesses that pay people or organize charity events.
Yeah, so that is pretty true. Jill! Jill! So yeah, that is pretty true. I would agree on a lot of those points, but here's the problem I notice. What happens when, like, the monarch has the access to the money, right? And then doesn't have any kind of limitations, right? I think it's more about how you set out the limits and guardrails for the monarch more than just, I guess maybe other kind of variables around, like how much they're being paid, right? I don't think it's about how much is being paid. I think one of the big things is what are the guardrails, what are the established kind of regulations, but what can we give to the monarch that allow them to be strong enough to lead, right?
That they pay completely. Another example is the Habsburgs, who also got their money from the government. By the 19th century, care to guess how much of the state budget was allocated to maintain the Habsburg family?
Yeah, so that's an interesting point. They spent less and less on themselves because, like, you're getting a lot of money. You have to spend that money on other kinds of things. All this stuff wasn't like worth, huge amounts of money. It wasn't worth like millions. All this alone that they kind of own would be nothing compared to what they're spending on for all kinds of all kinds of other things, right? There's a lot more variables to it. They're not just getting a bunch of expensive stuff. But they would wear a lot of expensive clothing because it did help them with their public image. It made them look like they truly were the top of the top. And it kind of made a lot more people respect them. You wouldn't really respect a king if he just came around, wearing really bad clothes and just being, looking kind of like a peasant, right? The clothes kind of make him stand out better, right? It could be either for good or for bad, but I tend to say it could be mostly for good.
Family, only about 0.5 to 1%. which in that period was the same amount spent on the construction of new roads. Under monarchies, the monarch has to think in terms of his or her lifespan. If he taxes the nation into poverty in just a couple years, he'll become destitute. If he wants to pass the state to his children, he needs to have a long-time preference.
That's what I think would be what monarchs need to do the most. Stick with the kind of the ideas of what makes a good man and and then for like the queen, what makes a good woman, right? I believe in these traditional values. I think those are really beautiful and it's really great. And they got to teach these kids to become good leaders and to care for the people. I think when you do that, it would just be amazing. The world would be much better if we had better fathers and better mothers.
Because they are like owners of property. Since the state is theirs, they don't want to damage it and are encouraged to tax the minimum needed to achieve his desired living standards/goals, and then leave the rest of the economy to maximize its growth, so they can work on long-time projects that will affect positively the nation and don't cause problems for when their children will rule. The opposite of a quote-unquote democratic society, where its leaders are not the owners of the state, but renters of it, thus no reason to make long-time improvement.
That is, I think, one of the best points he ever made in this video. I 100% agree. So if you're in office for a limited amount of time, might as well just do whatever, right? Let's just say Joe Biden, right? Joe Biden, he's not gonna get reelected, right? And he knows that. Well, he might have. I don't know what's gonna happen, but let's just assume it's 100% guaranteed that he won't be able to win the re-election, right? So, what does he do? He can literally do whatever, right? Might as well make the most of it. If you are kind of like, if the time span is kind of long, and you spend those years making great things, I think the good long term most of the time is public image and how you're going to be seen in the future. I think when someone elected, though, is, they want to make the most of it, kind of like what Rome did. A lot of the consuls wanted to be glorious, right? Have naked statues. If you've seen Oversimplified, you know what I mean.
No democratic leader owns their society and so has no incentive to think beyond the next election. And
this looks like, bro, this reminds me of like the EU. I think that might be the EU. I don't know. But the EU just sucks, man. Like, they don't do anything good. It's all just a big mess.
This is why politicians are so negligent with spending, inflation, debt, and unlike a king and his heirs.
And think about this. This guy's German. Do you think Germany's doing any better with their new democratic stuff, right? With their new republic? What's going on there? Oh, I noticed that they're all fighting. Huge amounts of corruption are happening. And we have AfD forming, and it's became very, very popular. It's called the, I think, Alternative for Deutschland, or Germany, right? AfD has became, I think, one of the fastest growing parties in Germany. No, the fastest, and it's outdoing everybody, right? This is a center right-winging political party, and this would put Germany back on track of being in the right-winging kind of side of things. Usually they were left-winging, but the left-wingers are all fighting against each other. Corruption, because they all are fighting, right? You still have, like, a lot of power, right? Doesn't matter, like, the voting and all that. It's so easy to create corruption anywhere, right? Even when it's a democracy. Oh boy. Stuttering a lot.
Democratic leaders don't have to deal with the consequences of their actions, so to maximize their impact, they begin to spend as much money as quickly as possible before their term expires. thus destroying the whole nation. So, no, monarchs do not hoard all the taxpayer money for themselves and spend it on whatever they want. Rather, monarchies come of economic benefit to the nation and the entire population. Monarchs have an actual reason to invest into their country because their children will inherit it in the end, unlike democratic leaders who can.
Also, a good example. Remember the French Revolution? What happened right after? Right after the French Revolution, we have a dictator who has more power than all the monarchs could ever dream of. Just saying, it's very easy for anyone to come into power once there's a stage of corruption, which was chopping off heads, even with innocents, right? It was a disaster for France. You can make a really good democracy, but you gotta use it right. Democracy doesn't just always do good, right? It's not always perfect. It's not always gonna guarantee success, right? You gotta do it when the people are forming together, right? When there's a sense of unity for everybody, whether it's nationality or maybe even class. Just saying, when people agree on one thing and they want to stick with it and they're against something, right? They have something to live up to try and get to. Doesn't even matter. Like, any system can work as long as the leader is good and as long as the people stand united. I think you can do anything. It's so much more powerful when people are united. But unfortunately, it's almost impossible for that to ever happen.
Come to power, spend as much money as possible, and leave so that the next one may deal with the issues. This is probably one of the most popular arguments against a monarchy. Why should someone, by virtue of being born to the right parents, have the right to exert power, whether absolute or not, over anyone else? I want to answer this with one simple question. Is there a completely fair way for someone to get into a high position of power, no matter the means? Why should someone who said the right kind of words to the right kind of people hold power over the entire nation?
I do agree with that point. Now, I don't think it's always going to be super fair for democracies when you really think about it, because look at America, for example. People aren't voting with their brains anymore. Everyone's voting with, vote blue no matter who. Or, with rednecks being like, oh, vote Republican, that's just how they are. I hate both parties. I think they both are corrupt and stupid. Personally, I'm conservative, I'm Christian, believe in God and all of that, right? I believe that our systems are all being corrupt because we're splitting each other. The people have become corrupt. You see what I mean there? Anyone can be corrupt. So can the people. The people aren't always right.
And not to mention the numerous ways these people get into positions of power in a republic. And I am not just talking about votes. Just because someone, for example, became president of a democratic nation through seemingly democratic means, doesn't mean that they got that position 100% fairly. Think about all the times these people used corruption to their advantage, how they can be greedy, and just how many times they lied to the very people that got them into power. But sure, it is more fair just because more people approve of them. A monarch, or specifically an heir, doesn't need to start a campaign, lie to his people, and use corruption because his position of power is already solidified from the very moment he or she exists in his mother's womb.
I do agree with that point, right? So I think what he's trying to convey is that when you're voted in, right, you got to make sure you keep yourself in that power because you're only there for a limited amount of time. So you're going to try and get there another time no matter what, right? As for the monarchy, if you're born into it, you automatically don't have to worry about keeping your power. You already have that power. So might as well use it correctly, or the only way to lose it is if you, as they say, frick it up. If you just ruin it, right? By, I don't know, declaring war on other countries randomly, or destroying the economy and killing all your money, right? If they do bad decisions, well, then you're gonna get crushed. As for democracies, you're voted in, right? And then everything goes bad. You just get out of there, right? and then you're fine. Then you can also just raise taxes one last time and, get out of office, right? I'm saying, like, they both can be corrupt, but monarchs, I think, depending on situations, most of the time, I think they're more forced to do good and to make better decisions, right? They're kind of in that position where they have to do this no matter what. A prince can't just leave, right? They are stuck with this. They have to take responsibility. And also, might I add this point, the negative side of this could be, the only way I see it with fighting is civil wars when, brothers fight against brothers. I think that's the bad side of monarchy. It will split families apart sometimes because, the family will fight over land and money and resources, right? I think that's the saddest part of it sometimes.
In this case, all that needs to be done is to educate the young heir on how to run the nation as he gets older, and most of the time, monarchs who were educated from a young age on what to do and how to run the nation when they get into power have a higher possibility of being better rulers than a president who got into office from absolutely no previous experience or knowledge.
I wouldn't really say that because, like, they probably are smart enough to get elected and, lead and all that type of stuff. Like, look at the presidents of the old, right? A lot of them were above like 200 IQ. Like, that's just insane. And even the ones today, I mean, like, we have idiots like Joe Biden and sometimes Trump's decisions. I like some of them, but I don't want to speak more of this. But you see, a lot of them will have basic ideas. The monarchy, right? I think they both can gain as much experience as possible, right? If you're elected, right, and you're president, you probably are smart enough to win the people, right? You probably know basic politics. Why would you even run if you were an idiot?
On what to do in that position. Also, it is important to say that having an heir makes politics and geopolitics much easier in that nation. You cannot rig whoever becomes the next monarch the same way one can rig an election, nor can you say for certain who will win the next election or elections afterwards.
I think the worst part of a democracy could be when you just are elected, and then as soon as the next election is going to come, you make excuse after excuse after excuse to trying to hold out the elections to wait longer, wait longer, wait longer. I think that is something that we should have a lot of limits on, because that's just like one of the biggest ways that actually can make corruption happen. Also, I think it's a double-edged sword with monarchy. Like, think about this, right? On one hand, they have enough power and resources where they don't need to worry about problems, right? But at the same time, they have a lot of resources and money, and as long as they don't have any big threats, they might get a little cocky and make some bad decisions. Who knows, right? Even when they do know how to lead, they are bound to make a lot of bad decisions. That's just kind of how life goes, right? And then the other kind of double-edged sword could be when you have nothing to worry about because you're born into being the king, right? If I was born and I became the king, I would have one part of the sword where it's like, yay, now I don't have to worry about trying to keep my power since I already have that. But two, since I already have that, I don't need to worry about power, right? Or I don't have to worry about getting out of here, right? Getting kicked out. I can just make a little bad decision, make a small excuse, but I'll still be in power. That's kind of the double-edged sword. As long as the double-edged sword is used right, I think monarchy is one of the best systems that we can use. And that's why I believe God chose a monarch. I think that's why God led monarchs to being some of the most powerful people alive. It's God's basically a monarch. Think about this, what it says in the Bible, right? It talks a lot about monarchs and kind of being the different kings, King David. It's just kind of interesting to me. God seems to have a favor in that ideology. That tells me everything.
Unlike in a monarchy, where you can say with confidence exactly who will be in charge for the next couple of decades. Not to mention that inheritance is not just something practiced by a certain royal family. Rather, normal day people practice it as well. For example, a farmer will almost always let his son or sons inherit his farm with all the fruits and vegetables. Even businesses are known to be passed down from the father to the son or daughter. Even in this modern world, one can still find businesses that pass down the ownership to their relatives. If one can inherit property, wealth, furniture, and titles, why is it so horrible to imagine that a person will inherit power as well? One cannot deny that in our modern world today, the idea of democracy is one of the most important systems a nation should have. The belief that the people should have a right to elect their leaders and steer.
Bro, sometimes I don't even think America deserves to have a democracy as great as we do. You know, coming from an American, it's just can be some of the biggest idiots alive. We have some of the dumbest people ever. Sometimes I wish we had someone else to worry about the problems, right? Although it is also, again, a double-edged sword, but you already know why.
The nation in the way they want it to go. And in most cases, monarchism is seen as the opposite, where the people are ruled by a king or queen who have the final say in terms of internal and foreign policy. But the truth of the matter is, monarchism is not mutually exclusive with democracy. People tend to mix up the term democracy with republic, that a democracy can only truly exist in a republican state. But history has shown otherwise. If we look at the nations of Europe after the Age of Enlightenment, we will see that the majority of monarchs at the turn of the 20th century were constitutional and had a democratic system.
Parliament plus monarch. And yeah, they seem to do pretty fine. I mean, they are some of the most popular parts of Europe of all time, right? Think about it. The times and eras that we all find Europe the most popular in, other than World War II, is, well,
already in place.
1800, right? They're some of the most known of all time, and yet we forget about these details. It wasn't just, oh, king, right? All powerful. No, there was a lot of limitations, and there was parliaments, especially in the West.
Whereas when we look at republics from that point forward, we will find that republics were vastly more authoritarian than your average European monarchy. The truth is, democracy and republicanism are definitely not the same thing. A republic is not always a democracy, as history has shown us with countries like the USSR, Yugoslavia, the Federal Republic of Austria.
Yeah, also, another point, America is not a democracy. We're a constitutional republic. Yeah, they were not really republics, yet they still had that type of voting style. Somewhat.
By definition, democracy is, quote, a system of government in which the people of a country can elect their representatives. And that is exactly how democracy works in monarchies. While the people cannot vote for the head of state, i.e. the king, they can still very much vote for their representatives, like the prime minister, members of parliament, and also the leaders of their local administration. And then these representatives will work alongside the king to ensure the stability of the country.
Yeah, that's why, in my opinion, I think a constitutional monarchy is probably the best system we've ever come up with. It's a mix of two ideas that could be really good, right? I don't see why people think that constitutional monarchies are that bad. The UK, they've had a lot of luck, seeing how they're one of the most successful countries in the world.
But of course, just like with republics, monarchies are not immune to autocracies, as we have seen with a few royal dictatorships and absolute monarchies. But the vast majority of monarchies...
Yeah, like, no one realizes this. There's a difference between authoritarians, right? Like autocrats, which auto means one, and then monarchy. The monarchy has a lot to do with family lines, and they do have a lot of limitations on them. With the autocrat, it's a little different. The autocrat has a little more power over the family, too, right? They can control more the family part of things, which is pretty crazy to think about, you know? They have that much power where they even control their own families, and, like, who can come up next in line. Usually, like, most of the time, the monarch doesn't have as much control.
Specifically in Europe at the turn of the 20th century were constitutional, like for example the United Kingdom, which is still a monarchy to this day with a democratic system. But the United Kingdom was not the first constitutional monarchy we know of. We know for a fact that the first recorded constitutional monarchy in the world was the Hittite Empire from over 1500 BC, where, while the king was the supreme ruler of the land, Many officials exercised independent authority over various branches of the government. Point being, democracy is not mutually exclusive with monarchism, specifically in a constitutional monarchy where elections can still be held and where people may elect their representatives. And republics are not always democracies either. If anything, the majority of republics in the 20th century were more authoritarian than monarchies. One could still use the argument that constitutional monarchies are just crowned republics, but as long as there is a king on the throne, even if he is just ceremonial, then the country is still, by definition, a monarchy. For many people, the term monarchy evokes images of knights in shining armor and kings and queens from days long past. This image perpetuates the idea that a monarchy is an inherently outdated system that cannot possibly function in the modern post-industrial age. But this assumption is completely false and misleading.
Like, republics have been there longer ago. Have you ever heard of the Roman Empire? The Greeks? They've used a system so long ago, right? The first, I would believe, system of government would be like autocratic, right? I just don't think it was monarchs. I think it was autocratic, right? They had such huge amounts of power. Then it became more republics and then monarchs. Monarch is a very unique system that was probably around, in the time of the Bible.
The institution of monarchy is not only compatible with the modern world and as effective as republican systems, but in my opinion, and the opinion of many others, it is even better than the alternatives. This notion stems from the fact that in most people's minds, the terms democracy and republic are synonymous, as I've stated, and that monarchies and democracies are incompatible. Nevertheless, 43 countries in the world still have some form of monarchy today, so it is not as unpopular as one might first think. Not only are almost a quarter of the world's countries still monarchies, but of the 10 countries with the highest quality of life, 5 are monarchies.
That is true, right? A lot of these still have a monarch today, and they're constitutional. But let's be fair, they aren't really the best countries. America still, what I would say, is the greatest country. I don't care much about quality of life index, but hey, good for them. A lot of these countries, a lot of these people are feeling happy. They feel like a lot of things are going good for them.
So how is it that an outdated system is not only still practiced in many countries, but also produces one of the highest quality of life for its citizens? The answer is simple. It's not an outdated system.
By the way, I do not think Switzerland should be this high. How is Switzerland so high up there? Yeesh. If I were to pick which one to live in, I would pick probably maybe Germany or Austria. Well, I am German, so I guess I'm being biased. If I were to be for living in school, definitely Finland. But just living in general, probably maybe Austria, not Netherlands. Netherlands sucks. Maybe Denmark would be cool. But Switzerland, I gotta do more research. What do they even do?
First of all, if you say that monarchy is an outdated system because it was created thousands of years ago, then surely you must
Bro, the republics. Republics are even older.
agree that democracy is equally outdated because it was already practiced in ancient Greece.
Let's go. Let's go. He can read my mind. He can read my mind.
Just because a system has been practiced for a long time does not mean that it cannot adapt to the times. Secondly, monarchies have proven time and time again.
Yeah, and also, which one failed again in the Roman era? The Roman Republic declined and got destroyed. Guess who took over? The Roman Empire. Interesting.
That they can work well alongside democracies, as I have explained previously. Most monarchs that still exist have adapted to the modern world. The days when monarchs ruled by the grace of God are long gone. Instead, they now rule based on a social contract in which both the monarch and the people live in a symbiotic relationship. The monarch also acts as a neutral voice in a democratic system, representing all citizens of a country, not just those who voted for the largest political party. This example can be seen in many countries such as Britain, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, the Benelux countries, etc. But even in the days of absolute monarchs and feudal lords, people like Charlemagne and Louis XIV could only dream of the powers that presidents and prime ministers have in some republics, which shows that monarchies can work better in some cases.
Yeah, I think the reason why is because here's their greatest limit. It was actually probably people like the Pope. Think about it. The Pope had so much control. Like, the Pope was so powerful. If you got excommunicated, well, good luck having your power. Most countries probably don't want to hang out with excommunicated countries, right? So the Pope had a lot of influence, a lot of power, right? And remember, they were basically the type of stuff Europe has today for, health care and social stuff that they have, right? That was performed by, guess what? The church back then. The church, was like, it's always been the same. Europe has always kind of been the same, right? Back then, the church kind of did a lot of the welfare for the people, right? And the church was so influential, right? If they were to, go against the king, then guess what? The citizens would go against the king. So, yeah, the Pope was way more powerful than these guys. I think we need to limit the Pope. Maybe not today. The Pope isn't that powerful today.
From all this, we can see that the institution of monarchy is not obsolete and can function well in modern society. Corruption is one of the biggest issues a government can face, and considering how much people talk about corrupt politicians and rulers, it's no surprise that many like to say that monarchy is a corrupt system in of it.
Every government is corrupt. Every government is corrupt. They've all had that history of corruption, bro. Like, they've all had that.
Itself. But it's clear that people don't really understand what corrupt means. Just because someone has political power and is wealthy does not make them inherently corrupt. Nevertheless, if we look at history, we'll find that there were indeed a few corrupt kings or emperors, but as I said, only a few. The reason being is that monarchs don't really have a reason to be corrupt. The main reason why people engage in corruption in the first place is because of two things: money and power.
Yeah, but let's be honest. Monarchy has a very large fair share of corrupt people. They've all had that history. All these governments have been very, very corrupt and done very bad. So personally, in my opinion, I think constitutional monarchies and monarchs, yeah, like, they can be easily corrupt. But it's like the same thing with the democratic, right? With democracies, republics, or whatever, right? They all can be corrupt. It mostly matters by the person, honestly. Not really by what's going on, right? Because, like, think about Napoleon. Napoleon had absolute power, but he made things good for the French people. He built a lot of banks, gave a lot of good rights, and he was a lot nicer to different cultures, different races, and was trying to balance out with the conservative church because he knew, guess what? People care for the church and the Pope. So Napoleon was an amazing leader, yet he had so much power. He was literally an emperor, for crying out loud.
But monarchs are already covered with both of these things from the moment they are born to the moment they let out their last breath. And this is the reason why so many monarchs weren't corrupt, simply because they didn't need to engage in corruption. Now, some may point to a few monarchs like King Louis XVI and Nicholas II.
Yeah, but it's because they were weak and they didn't have good parents. That's my take on this. Most of the bad kings that there are, I think it's because they had horrible parents or they were just not taught the right way. I think a lot of it comes down to a mix between nature and nurture. You gotta make sure the nurture's good. Well, also, it's gonna be in the nature that some people are gonna be corrupt. There's always gonna be bad people.
Whose countries were embroiled in revolution due to their quote-unquote corruption of hosting parties and presumably not caring about the lower classes. But that isn't corruption, it's just negligence, and most people confuse acts of negligence for acts of corruption. Republics, on the other hand, oh boy, is
One of the most famous examples of corruption was probably Watergate. It became so popular that anything with like really bad corruption and getting away with things happens, you call it with gate in it. Think about it, like Elsa Gate with the whole YouTube thing in 2016 and 2017.
Is there a lot to unravel here? Now, we wouldn't really say that
Yeah, let's be honest. Republics, they can be so corrupt. Sometimes even worse than monarchs. Like, look at Bulgaria. I know, like, the rest of the eastern countries. They're some of the worst countries for corruption. Or, well, I guess best countries for corruption. Yeah, well, they're just corrupt. That's the point.
republics are inherently more corrupt, but rather they open up the possibility of corruption a lot more. So many politicians, prime ministers, and presidents have been embroiled in corruption scandals and court cases that it's almost impossible to keep track of them all. That's why today, when we hear that a politician is exposed for corruption, we don't act shocked, we just see it as another Tuesday. There are plenty of
Yeah, I honestly think we're all kind of used to a lot of this corruption happening. We're not really gonna want to make changes. We're not really that ambitious anymore to make things better. So we're just gonna let, bad people slide nowadays, which is really sad, honestly. Like, we gotta make things better for everyone. And I do think that the real threats, right, the ones who are growing in power are not really, people like the president in America. I think it's probably, places like BlackRock, right? Big corporations. And I think that's a negative side of capitalism. I love free market trade. I think that's a good thing. Working hard to build a business, I think those are good. But man, like, some people just, these clever evil people just do some of the worst things ever. And there's so many big companies that are, stealing cocoa beans from Africa and getting little kids to work there. Like, it's awful. The government needs to, like, put these rail guards, but they let them escape because guess what? They're making the United States a lot more money. See what I mean? Huge amounts of corruption. And a lot of these businesses, these big corporations are in on it. I'm not gonna be like one of those communists or socialists gonna be like, oh, we need to abolish capitalism. But I agree with him. He also made another video where I haven't seen it yet, but it was a video about how capitalism destroys the soul of a country, right? So I think capitalism has so much negative too. Why do you think that God does not side with either one?
of reasons why politicians are so likely to turn to corruption, and it always includes power and money. As I've previously stated, monarchs don't really have a reason to engage in corruption because they are already secured of both. Politicians, on the other hand, have every reason to engage in them. Their positions are always temporary, a couple years at most and they are out, so they try to make the best of their status as they can.
They can either do the best they could so they can be remembered as someone amazing, or they'll just be corrupt, right? I think a lot of the time they tend to be corrupt, but remember, there's always going to be the good and the bad side of things with everything.
Get as much money and power as possible before their time is up. This is all made worse with a system of lobbying in a democratic republic. For those who are not aware, lobbying is the act of persuasion in politics for politicians to support a certain decision which they in the beginning did not support or were neutral. And I think you can definitely see how corrupt this system can get.
Yes, the different trusts. And that's why one of my favorite presidents, you know what? Maybe my favorite president of all time was Teddy Roosevelt. Because I'm not joking, like, they gave him money. Standard Oil, right? They gave him huge amounts of money. And guess what happened? He said, give me your money. I don't care. I'm still gonna crush you. And he actually did. Yeah, the guy got a lot of money, right? John D. Rockefeller, he still got a lot of money. Became one of like richest people to ever exist. But he still broke up the companies. He did a lot of trust busting, and he broke down these big corporations and tried to create new limits, right? Without trying to socialize everything as well. He didn't try to make everything government powerful, right? He tried to create a healthy balance. When you have someone like Teddy Roosevelt who isn't really, he's like immune to the corruption because he grew up with great family, and he went through a lot of hardship, right? You can kind of see his childhood. He grew up with a lot of hardship, and he fought to make sure, fought hard to make it good for him, right? When you have people like that, I think that's the good side. If he were a monarch, oh my, that would actually be the most amazing thing I would ever see. I want to see that. If Teddy Roosevelt, right, if he was a monarch, maybe like, I don't know, movie or some kind of alternate history video, if somehow he just became a monarch of the United States, I wonder what he would do.
Since majority of the time, politicians get bribed by a certain group to support a bill that is in their favor. A famous example of this is when Walt Disney lobbied Congress to reform the copyright system.
Yeah. Like, seriously, Disney? I want to use your copyrighted characters. Let me use them. Luckily, DeSantis, he's an awesome dude. He went against Disney, and guess what? Now I'm going to use their characters in 2024. At least just the Steamboat Willie. I can't wait to use Steamboat Willie in 2024.
Just so they could retain personal ownership of their character Mickey Mouse. If anything, the modern world has proven that corruption is a lot more rampant in republics, but as I stated, it does not mean that republicanism is a corrupt system in of itself. In fact, I do not believe any system is inherently corrupt.
Yeah, I 100% agree. None of them are inherently corrupt. Maybe, just maybe other than communism or fascism. Just because the insane amount of powers given and the insane amount of absence of balance. And to the idea that in monarchy, or sorry, not monarchy, communism, the idea is, right, like anything you do is for the good of the people, right? So therefore, literally anything you do, since it's good for the people, against the bourgeoisie, right? Anything you do is good. That is a horrible way to see, like, for the viewpoint of the world to be. And that's why I feel like communism does not work. Because they keep on seeing themselves as the greatest. Because, they're standing up for the people's rights, even though they're not actually, right? That's why you saw so much death and blood when the Bolsheviks took over, because they thought everything they did was justified for the good of the people, right? Monarchies can't really do that, because if they tried, well, let's just say it wouldn't work out so well, right? They have a lot of other people around them. They don't just have such supreme amount of resources and power, and republics don't really have that. They all have that kind of limitation.
But just like with republics, it doesn't mean monarchism is corruption-free, especially when we consider the parliaments. But to say that the monarch is corrupt in of itself is an entirely different story.
Honestly, if you ever watch this video, can you make a video on Otto von Bismarck? Like, please. Like, maybe you already have. I'll look closer, but please mention more about him, like a personal video or something. That would be so cool. Because Otto von Bismarck, in my opinion, is probably the greatest German leader to ever exist. No one is better. Not even Wilhelm.
And if anything, the monarch is the least corrupt figure in the country. Monarchy is obviously not a perfect system. In fact, no political system in this world is perfect. But the amount of slander monarchism gets from people who do not fully understand or comprehend it is just unfair. They see a rich man sitting on a golden throne with all the money in the world in the media and instantly conclude that this is all they really need to know about the whole system. As I have demonstrated, monarchism can be far more complicated than just a guy sitting in a castle with a lot of money. And people think that the position of a monarch is a privilege, but this assumption is far from right. Truth of the matter is, being a king is one of the most difficult positions a man can find himself in. A king stands alone against all who wish harm upon his people.
Yeah, and think about this. Imagine you become a monarch, right? You're the king, right? So you just became the king, and now you lead, I don't know, 10, 20 million people. Like 20 million citizens, and your land is big as Romania. Romania is still a relatively large country, right? You're still leading a lot of resources and land. It's not America, but it's still quite a big amount of land, right? And now you have to worry about so much, right? Oh, wait, we need to construct new bridges here. No, we need that money to go for more railways around here. No, we gotta build more factories here. No, we gotta do this, do that, do this, do that, do this, do that. What are we gonna do? Monarch, sir, king, your highness, what do we do?
He, without a sense of safety, has to have the will and duty to fight against all the evil in the world. Think about this and all the burdens this man has to carry, the expectations he needs to meet, and the duty that he has.
Sir, I want to invest in Gecko car insurance, but he wants to do Gecko home insurance. Which one are we gonna invest in, your highness?
Like, Geico ship insurance.
That's not a real thing! That's not a real thing, sir! Your highness! You... Off with your head. No. No, you can't do that anymore. Otherwise, you're a awful person. We're gonna cut off your head now.
Think of all this next time you envy the position of a monarch. As Sir Fulke Greville stated, quote, "The greatest slave in a kingdom is generally the king of it." End quote.
Yeah. A good example, too, was just the stupidity of Russia, too. Like, the Russian Empire enslaved themselves all the time. A lot of the people are idiots, and the the people above too, right? Even they were all kind of stupid, and they all fought. And then when we had good leaders like Catherine the Great tried to set up a talk with everybody and try and get things settled up, right? They were all kind of just still arguing. That was a good example. It takes a good Russian czar, right? And that was like one of the good ones. Another really good one too was probably maybe Tsar Alexander or Tsar Peter. Yeah, like Peter the Great. I think Peter the Great was awesome. He learned from the West and he was able to make things better for the people. We have all these other mediocre, just really bad Tsar leaders, but then we have these ones that we just still remember because they did so much for everybody. So yeah, that's the end of the video. Hope you enjoyed this. I might watch more of it later because, bro, he makes pretty good videos. I'm gonna give a like to this. Please watch more of his content, like and subscribe or whatever, right? And yeah, hope we can get in contact in the future too, sir. Because, like, honestly, I'm a big fan of your work. And I know, like, you might find this video. Hope you get bigger, Let's help him. Come on, bring in the 10,000 subs. We needed to hit 10,000. And yeah, that's kind of it. I'll see you later. Thank you for everything. And yeah, I'll see you later. Goodbye.
By the way, maybe you should watch some of my other videos. They're really good.